Yeah, Frame Raider.
Nintendo's Virtual Boy from 1995. It's been sitting on the shelf for as long as I can remember. I've been hesitant to use this console because of the material piece on the back. Naturally oily skin means I'll need a replacement piece if I use the console too much. Whatever, it's been long enough. It's time to cover the Virtual Boy. And yes, I definitely should have used a taller table. Virtual Boy was Nintendo's attempt at 3D. Despite the name, it's not virtual reality. Even for its time, the title was a stretch. More accurately, the 32-bit Virtual Boy presents 3D visuals behind its iconic red stereoscopic display. Making this thing affordable was reportedly a challenge. Red LEDs were cheap and considered by Nintendo to be an effective color scheme for the effect. The way the Virtual Boy functions isn't simple. Without taking the thing apart, you'll need to look online for blueprints, because on the outside, you're probably not expecting much. Credit goes to Capetti.org and iFixit.com for these images. Essentially, what the Virtual Boy has are two LED units that are then displayed through a lens into a set of vibrating mirrors, which redirects the 384x224 resolution image to your retinas. Unfortunately, there's an issue for the designer to overcome: eyeball location. We all have different molds to our faces, so the image needs to be able to adjust. The solution was these two pieces on the top of the unit. The focus slider changes focus. The IPD dial is used to change the distance from your eyes. This might be just mine, but that thing is stubborn. Anyways, best to do this while the Virtual Boy title screen shows. On the headset we have the controller port, a PlayLink input for multiplay, no released games supported it, there's a volume slider, and lastly, a headphone jack. So, how's this thing get power? You could use 6 AA batteries for 4 hours of excitement, because Nintendo considered the thing a portable console. In what world is this portable? How would you carry this around? I took it to my friend's house once. I had to put it in my old jukebox box. Okay, yes, you can remove it from the tripod. Somehow I didn't even know this until today. Alternatively to 6 AA batteries, you can use an AC adapter to plug it into the wall. How do you do it? Through this piece of plastic. Innovation! Here's my library of games. I have a hunch I accidentally picked up a Japanese one. This is what a game box looks like, same size as those used for the Game Boy line. Cartridges go in here, just take off their plastic protectors first. Now to plug in and start playing. Where's the power button? Oh, silly me, it's on the controller. Possibly the first console to be turned on by the controller. Probably the only one that requires it. It's not the worst idea. This controller isn't bad. I expected at least somewhat worse. It holds firm in the hands, maybe a little chunky, but has it where it counts. There are 2 buttons on the back, which you'll press with your index fingers. Part of me wants to get a USB adapter and play Robotron with this thing. Would feel right at home here, though not specifically VR related. Still, I think it's best we drop the VR term altogether because short of just one game, from the North American library at least, the library is built up of mostly sports, puzzle, and a few platformer games. Which is kinda strange, considering how their initial pitch claimed that the Virtual Boy would give developers the chance to create wildly unique and creative games. The games are something, but I wouldn't say wildly unique is a fitting phrase. The story behind the Virtual Boy is a bit unusual. In the end, it was a Nintendo product, but wasn't from its conception. You see, a company called Reflection Technology was working on their own 3D hardware, which they hoped would be picked up and licensed for mass production. Test markets were initiated, and they shared some familiar concerns. Red and black visuals are atypical, and the technology isn't quite there yet. The most prevalent issue was motion sickness. User reviews are often filled with comments about that. It was clear that this wasn't ready for the market. Now imagine this, true story. Sega turned this thing down, only for Nintendo to come around and say yes, this is a good idea. And to be fair, it is a good idea, I'm just not sure if the Virtual Boy was. Nintendo seemed to realize this early on, when they had their pre-production demonstrations received negatively by the press. After this, Nintendo reportedly lost faith in the project. What do you do when that happens? Produce absurd marketing in an attempt to grab what little attention was left.
There's only one problem. It needs your eyes. Virtual Boy, see it now in 3D.
That's terrifying! I don't want a Virtual Boy now! I like how in most of their commercials, people are actively trying to avoid the thing.
If you're going round and round trying to choose a game system, jump off here.
The Virtual Boy is, according to many, the reason VR would be avoided for many years. Only around the 2010s did the technology become good enough to achieve reasonable results. I have an Oculus Quest 2, and the Virtual Boy is a night and day comparison. Modern headsets track your head. The Virtual Boy will not. It stays perfectly still wherever you've put it, whether on a table or on a table. You can be about a half meter away from the Virtual Boy and still see the screen pretty well, and that's a far fetch from what we have today. The point is, the technology is completely different. I was born a year after this thing came out, but I've heard stories from older friends who told me that these things were glued to the shelves. Nobody bought them. From a launch price of $180 US, $330 for inflation, all the way to clearing out, they did not move. Its legacy was to sell just 770,000 units, which by Nintendo standards was embarrassing. The Game Boy sold almost 120 million. Consider that the Nintendo 64 wasn't a success at nearly 33 million. The N-Gage sold 3 million. To this day, the Virtual Boy is the worst-selling Nintendo console of all time. What happens when a game system by an important company flops? It gets expensive 30 years later. I'm not sure if I should have bought this thing. Everyone's talked about it at this point. Still, I gotta do this console library, right? I mean, after all, it only got 14 games here. Easy peasy. Speaking of which, this thing never came out in Europe at all. Alright, so, where's the video out? On to RetroArch! But first, I'd like to try my best to give you a visual demonstration of what it's actually like to play a Virtual Boy. If you're like me, you've been curious for all these years. No emulator can compare to the true experience. Ironically, you might prefer it emulated. So, after playing, the best real-world comparison I can make is to imagine your uncle inviting you to his basement where he's got this big screen TV. It's a huge room. Everything other than the screen is pitch dark. By the way, if this is something your uncle does, leave immediately. Considering the Virtual Boy's screen only takes up a fraction of your eyesight in the headset, you'll never feel truly immersed, regardless of what game is being played. The way the screen looks is very crisp though. It's not like some kind of crappy projector display. The illusion of 3D is fun. About as much fun as those old movies with red and cyan glasses. Some movies would use the effect really well, and others, not so much. I think the Virtual Boy fits somewhere in between that. I was a bit let down when I first tried it, because while I wasn't expecting much from the effect, I figured it'd be a little more interesting than this. Oh, by the way, I've often heard it said that you can use this thing while laying down. Wow, that is not a good angle for my beard. I'm not sure how you can use a Virtual Boy this way. There's a piece of plastic in the middle that will really hurt your nose. I'm thinking Nintendo specifically designed it so that you wouldn't do this, for some reason. The point is, if you wake up with a Virtual Boy on your head, you're probably already dead. Before starting any of its games, you get this message on screen asking if you'd like to automatically pause. What does that mean? Well, the Virtual Boy was prone to giving people headaches, so there was an option for games to pause themselves at 15 or 30-minute intervals, so you could then take a break. Truly incredible technology. Did I ever get a headache from using the Virtual Boy? Honestly, it depended on what game I was playing. But yeah, a few of these games gave me some dizziness after prolonged play. Maybe that's why Nintendo kept the majority of these games so simple. The less going on, the more you'll be able to sit and endure them. Well, may the suffering begin. It's time to cover those games. Game number 1, 3D Tetris. What do you know, the last Virtual Boy game is alphabetically the first. You're familiar with Tetris, but how about Tetris in the third dimension? It's easier to pick up than I expected. The rotating 3D board gives you a great sense of perspective, slowly revealing all of its angles with total freedom. You can jerk it a bit manually, but it's better to let it sit and fulfill your vaporwave desires. The controls are great. Shapes are able to be flipped in all directions to fill the remaining blocks. They don't fall immediately if you place them, which, thank goodness. This is a great interpretation of Tetris that feels very experimental, but fun. Give it a try. Game number 2, Galactic Pinball. 4 different space-themed boards to play, each with a couple fun gimmicks, like smashing an alien's face in. The physics are quite realistic. I lost a lot, but it was usually my own fault. The soundtrack is incredible. I'll have to add some of these to a playlist. Try this on a real Virtual Boy, it's really fun. This hardware is honestly great for games with a standstill perspective. Seriously, if you ever get your hands on one of these, give this game a spin. It's a dreamy experience. Game number 3, Golf. Well, I do like the many different options you get for aiming your ball. You can change the direction, stance, club type. The environments look alright. Now if only they weren't in red and black. 8 holes, some variation between them, but nothing remarkable. You're better off finding another way to get your golf fix because this game did not turn heads. Game number 4, Jack Bros. Ah yes, a game so frickin' rare it has to be from Atlas. Oh, also, fun fact, a character you play here, Jack Frost, is the Atlas mascot. Jack Bros is a twin-stick shooter which has Bomberman and even Sokoban elements to it. Incredible idea. The goal is to collect all the available keys in a stage, then find the exit where you'll plop down into the next one. A simple concept that was done extremely well. Seeing the following stage just beneath you the whole time is a great visual detail. Beat a couple acts and you're faced with a boss fight. Fail, and you gotta start over the last series of stages. If this game wasn't considered a holy grail item, I'd have probably bought my own copy. Game number 5, Mario Clash. So this was a Super Mario Land game in development, which was turned into a Mario Bros. Sequel. Safe to say we would have preferred the opposite, but I guess this was Nintendo's way of saying, not sure if this console will work on the long term. You know how there was Pac-Man, and then Super Pac-Man? Mario Clash is like the Super Pac-Man. As per Mario Bros, you gotta take out all the enemies. This time you need to throw shells to do it, whether horizontally or vertically, as this uses 3D depth to its advantage. Vertical attacks are often necessary for tougher enemies. This game is alright. Just like Mario Bros, I can enjoy a session, but I don't usually play for too long. Game number 6, Mario's Tennis. Yes, this is the game that started the Mario sports phenomena. It's remarkably simple. Whether 1v1 or 2v2, it's always the same game with different skyboxes. You know, I would say this is a bit dull, but I still play simple games of Pong with my friends sometimes. This is a step beyond that. By the time you finish playing a match, you'll probably find that the 3D effect has mostly lost its appeal. Maybe I'm just spoiled by modern technology, but either way, it's not an incredible reflection of the Virtual Boy's capabilities, making this an odd choice as a pack-in title. Still not a bad game if the concept interests you. Game number 7, Nestor's Funky Bowling. Nintendo Power magazines are not something I grew up reading, so I'm largely unfamiliar with the Nestor character. I hate his throwing animation for being so uncanny, but otherwise it's an enjoyable game of bowling. There's a lot of personality on offer, much like what you see on that floating TV screen at the alley. The bowling physics are quite good, easy to control and adapt to. I managed to get a strike once. Game number 8, Panic Bomber. How lucky am I that this came bundled with my system? I've always been a fan of puzzle games with personality, and this is one within the leagues of Puyo Puyo and Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. They play similarly as well. You have to match icons, but in Panic Bomber, specifically in collections of 3. There are also bombs you can throw down to eliminate all types and bunches. Panic Bomber's characters are well animated and hilarious to watch. It's another game you'll want to progress through, if even just to see what else they came up with. If you like puzzle games, this might be right up your alley. Game number 9, Red Alarm. Okay, I know what you're thinking. This looks bad. I've heard people tell me it's bad. Now having played it, I can't quite agree, but I totally understand the distaste. In a game that focuses on wireframe, exclusively red lines will blend together, which indeed makes the experience confusing at times. The worst offenders are textureless walls, which the game will sometimes put in front of you with just one opening. Where is it? Usually your only sign is seeing where other enemies came from. Nonetheless, the game is easy to get into. The first level in particular does a great job setting an expectation. I just don't know why it keeps saying Nintendo Virtual Boy and T&E Soft Presents on the screen. A lot of people compare this to Star Fox, and there was some prototype Star Fox Virtual Boy game which might have fed into that idea. Yeah, there are similarities, but it's more like a 3D Gradius in my opinion. Past some fundamental flaws, once you've adjusted to the game, it's a lot of fun. Game number 10, Teleroboxer. When you talk about VR experiences on Virtual Boy, this one is brought up a lot. After all, it's in a first-person perspective. Does it look good on the headset? Well, sure. The characters are all built up of combined sprites at varying distances. It's still just a box in your vision though, so immersion is gonna be negligible. Anyways, in Teleroboxer, you and an opponent will use your robot-controlling headsets to do battle with ferocious robots. It's a difficult game to master. The manual implies there are at least a dozen unique moves to learn. Each robot has their own special techniques that you'll also need to learn to dodge. So basically, Punch-Out! Teleroboxer is a great time, as long as you're better at fighting games than me. Game number 11, Vertical Force. A shmup by Hudson Soft? This should be good. It's an interesting concept. You get 2 different playing fields you can swap between at any time. I feel like this idea must have been done before. Would Zaxxon count? Either way, it makes a lot more sense being on the Virtual Boy. In gameplay terms, it's a fairly basic shmup. Shoot bad guys, collect new powers, fight a boss after each stage. I only wish I had a copy to test the 3D for myself. Game number 12, Virtual Boy Wario Land. I've heard it said that this is a great platformer. The moment I got into a water stage, and it played nicely, I knew this would be a hidden gem. If you've played a Wario Land game before, you can expect the same sort of antics here. Wario is greedy and wants treasure. Probably more story to that, but go forth and collect items, while smashing whatever enemies and obstacles get in your way. The Virtual Boy spin is introduced when Wario needs to swap from the foreground to the background layer. This aspect of the game isn't too interesting. There are other 3D effects, but I saw nothing noteworthy here. Forgetting the fact that this is on Virtual Boy, Wario Land is an excellent platformer that you deserve to look into. Game number 13, Virtual League Baseball. You know, I'm not usually horrible at baseball games, but I am at this one for some reason. Despite the fact that I'm horrible at it, I don't feel that this is a very enjoyable experience. There are only 2 basic perspectives, at bat and an overhead of the field. The worst part of the game is how everyone moves so slow, it's very difficult to make outs. I've played much better baseball games on the Sega Genesis. Steer clear of this one. Game number 14, Waterworld. A Kevin Costner movie licensed game. Man, this one is weird. It plays like an obscure arcade game, feels like a red and black vaporwave fever dream. All you do is move this ship around, shooting at people on jet skis. Over and over. It's alright for a handful of minutes, but gets old quick. This is the kind of game that you can't imagine actually making it to store shelves, but it did somehow. This is remarkably bland. So wait, did I recommend 11 out of 14 North American games? Whoa! With perhaps the exception of Vectrex, this is the most consistently entertaining library I'm yet to sit through, and that is a shock to me. I purposefully avoided this console's library so I could be fresh with it, and I expected trash, but what I ended up discovering was a surprisingly good lineup. I'm not really a fan of the Virtual Boy itself, but the games? Absolutely. And one thing that often stuck out to me about them was the music. The virtual sound unit carries 5 channels and sounds very unique. Seriously, look up some soundtracks and keep them going on in the background. You might be pleasantly surprised. The Virtual Boy is a console that makes me wish it was the Vectrex. There are games here that I want to play, and the 3D effect is passable, but operating it isn't something I find enjoyable. If only the thing had video out, then we might have had something here. But that said, if this were the case, I don't think many people would have stuck with the traditional play method, hence eliminating the entire point. Nobody's making money off of this thing anymore, so my question is, why hasn't Nintendo taken the opportunity to re-release these games? Would you buy a Nintendo Switch compilation of them all? I would. Couldn't be too difficult for them either. Would have been better had they done it years ago when the 3DS was still active. Seriously missed opportunity. Post-mortem, Nintendo has used the Virtual Boy as an ongoing joke.
All hail the Virtual Boy.
So thankfully they're being lighthearted about the thing these days. This console was a careful reminder that gimmicks can only go so far. If you'd like to try the Virtual Boy yourself and have an Oculus Quest 2, with sideloading enabled, you can check out the emulator Virtual Boy Go. It replicates the experience in a modern VR environment, sort of. Nothing I can tell you will translate to the 2D footage being presented, unfortunately.
What?
What I'll say is that the 3D effect works, but it isn't quite the same regarding depth. At least that's the impression I got. Still far closer to an authentic experience than using an emulator on PC. Now I can try the games I'll never get without having to spend a fortune. I would do an individual video on this emulator alone, but that might depend on whether or not I can figure out a better way to capture footage from it. So that's the Virtual Boy, Nintendo's ultimate failed console. Is it deserving of its bad reputation? Yes and no. Whether the games were good or not, if the console is awkward to play, then people are going to avoid it. I don't think the intended experience is that bad. I usually hear people say this thing is awful, and I expected them to be exaggerating. They kind of are, but I will absolutely agree that the technology wasn't quite there yet. A bold move by Nintendo, one that they could thankfully recover from. Try again in 2011.